Welcome to the question of the day. But first we're going to start off with a fun fact. This is Hillis Brothers, and we're going to answer some questions. And I'm John. And the fun fact of the day is, Nate, did you know that 10% of all paint gets dumped down the drain?
10%? People are actually dumping that down the drain?
Yes. And you might be drinking it right now.
Well, what's the proper way to get rid of paint?
Well, what you want to do is you want to fill it with either dirt, cat litter, and then put the lid back on it, and then put it in a waste dump. You want to let it dry out in the sun, anything like that.
So it's not liquid?
Yeah, it's not liquid. You want it to be hard. Here's the scary part. When they did the math, it's 60 million gallons a year that gets dumped down the drain.
I guess I'm going to be drinking bottled water from now on.
Bottled or distilled.
Okay.
You might want to think about distilled. Get that fluoride out of there.
All right, well, we'll get right to it here. The question of the day comes from Joe H. from Standale. He asks, in what order should I paint a room?
Are we talking about spraying? Or are we talking about the basic residential
This
type?
is a house where, people already living, they have their carpet down. Just the homeowner repainting their room.
First thing you're going to want to do, there's a lot of different ways people do it. Get into that room. Move all the furniture to the center. Cover everything up with plastic. You can buy it at Home Depot, Sherwin-Williams, stores like that. And you put down the plastic, cover the furniture, roll out the ceilings. And
how about patches?
You can do the patching depending on how bad the patching is. I would first do the ceilings.
Okay.
If the patching's really bad, then of course you have to start with the patching. But most things are nail holes.
Okay.
So if it's a bad patch, you got to let it sit up, and it's going to take a couple hours to dry. Start with that first. But usually you get into a room, if it's not too bad, start with the ceiling to give it the chance to dry. And that's going to take a couple hours to dry, because it might take a couple coats, okay, depending on the ceiling. So do the ceiling first, cover everything up. Then go through, do the patching on the walls. Then if the ceiling requires another coat, go ahead and do the ceiling. You're going to want to have a 3/8 snap roller for the ceiling, depending on, that's if it's a flat ceiling. If it's a textured ceiling, maybe a 1/2-inch roller. And usually a textured ceiling is going to cover better than a flat ceiling. You'll probably get away with one coat.
So what, just like a flat on the ceiling?
That's recommended in most rooms, is a flat on the ceiling. Unless it's a bathroom, then you can put a little sheen on there. And then you go through, patch the walls, sand all that, and then the next step is, if you're going to paint the trim, if it's already been painted before, it's easy. You just check it, make sure it's not oil. If it's oil, then you have to go through and prime it first, and then put on a couple coats of latex paint, usually a semi-gloss or a satin, depending on how shiny you want it.
I've heard a lot of different things about tape. Can I use that cheap yellow tape, or do I have to get that frog tape?
Well, you're going to have to let the trim dry for hours before you go ahead and do the walls, okay? Now, if you're not a good painter, yeah, you're going to want to use tape. Professional painters will sometimes tape up the baseboards so they don't get sprinkles on them when they roll the walls. But a good painter can carry a wet rag with them and wipe off any sprinkles. And if you're using a good paint, a lot of times you don't have to worry about that. So you go through, paint the trim, let it sit. Sometimes you're going to have to let it sit for 4 hours before you tape it. And then if you're going to tape it right away, yes, you're going to want to use something that releases really well. And that would be a frog tape. That might be a low tack tape.
Or like that blue tape that they have?
Some blue tape, delicate it's called. Tape it up. Make sure you use a putty knife. Secure it well, because if you don't secure it well, you're wasting your time. And it's going to seep underneath and you're going to be upset anyways. Then the last step is going through priming patches that you have, after you sand them of course, then going through and painting the walls with whatever sheen that you want to go with.
Just a good paint.
A good paint, Sherwin-Williams, Home Depot, they all make some good paints. You can get low VOC paint if you're worried about it during the winter. We can get into more of that later. This is kind of like big overhaul of project, but there's a lot of details that we didn't get into here. But
all right, well, thanks for answering that question.
If you want a good painter, go to HillisBrothers.com.